Remember Suicide Squad? I remember it because it was a terrible movie. Or apparently there's also a straight to DVD movie called Suicide Squad Hell to Play, but don't worry, it has nothing to do with DCEU. Now, although I hated the live action movie, I was definitely a lot more hopeful for this one. While I'm not a massive fan of the DC Universe animated original movies, they can be entertaining in their own ways. Plus, I really like the Flashpoint Paradox movies, so I'm more than willing to give one of these movies a chance. After watching it, I was grateful that I only had to sacrifice an hour to watch it, cause honestly, while I did think the movie was perfectly fine for what it wanted to be, it's something I probably would have skipped if I knew what I was going to get. But before I get to the negative stuff, I'd like to explain some stuff I think this movie did much better than the 2016 Suicide Squad movie. The first aspect is the character establishment. One of the things that really turned me off was the huge exposition dump in the first 30 minutes where they categorically release information about the main characters in a very boring, badly paced, inconsistently toned, and poorly fleshed out way. In this movie, I get the feeling that the character establishment was a lot more subtle, and there was even a scene where Amanda Waller was introducing the members similarly to the way she did in Suicide Squad, but here it was during a period where the events had moved past the initial kickoff phase, so our interest and investment in the story was slightly bigger, and the exposition was effectively quicker, which brings me to another aspect I think this movie did right, which was right definition of priorities. 2016 Suicide Squad movie had too many characters that relied on us caring about them in a way that would only be possible if they were properly fleshed out, and unfortunately with some of them it was just not possible. With Hell to Play, they were more effective when it came to the amount of depth they had to insert in the characters. With characters like Deathshot and Bronze Tiger, they were more fleshed out in comparison to other Suicide Squad members that only received the most basic character establishment and were not subject to character development, which makes sense because Deathshot and Bronze Tiger had more important roles in the story, and the same thing applies to characters like Amanda Waller and Zoom. The only exceptional case was Killer Frost, who had the same level of depth as the other members but still had an important role in the story, but that was only because she was more of a tool or plot device for the direction that the movie took, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. I think it would only be a bad thing if the movie required us to care about her more than we should, but it didn't feel like the case. Another thing that really helped the narrative is that every character arc present in the more fleshed out characters had a key role in the narrative of the movie, which I can't say the same for certain characters in DCEU Suicide Squad. Something else I think this movie succeeded at was taking advantage of the damning morals of the characters. One thing that really disappointed me about DCEU Suicide Squad was how the main characters were criminals, but they decided to end the movie with a family/friendship themed direction. At the end, they became superheroes that just so happened to be morally ambiguous and conflicting, and I feel like Hell to Play took a lot more advantage of the fact that it's a movie starring criminals by taking the movie into an interesting direction. The idea of a card that gives you a free pass to heaven led to a very interesting climax where every character with their own different intentions selfishly wanted the card for their own personal gain. And one thing I really liked was the idea that if the card was in the hand of one of the characters and he died, the card would have an effect on him and it wouldn't work with anyone else anymore. So the opponent had to find a way to get the card without killing the holder, which was a really fun concept, and I thought the conclusion was pretty fair and satisfying. But enough of the smooshy stuff, let's get down to the negative stuff, and I'm first gonna talk about Harley Quinn. You know, despite the fact that I think this movie did a lot of things better than DCEU Suicide Squad, including the action scenes, one thing this movie did not change was the cringe fest that is Harley Quinn's character. Here, she was also unfunny, which is a downer because that's her main role. She's a punchline disposer, except her dialogue sucks. Like, I honestly would have been fine with her unimportant presence in the movie if she were actually entertaining, but she's not. Although that's not my main issue with this movie. The biggest problem has to do with the art department. The reason I struggle to get into these DC animated movies is that they share very similar art styles. There are some that try to deviate from the generic DC look, but even with those ones, you can spot a lot of similar design choices and color palettes, which is even worse because most of these movies take place at night, so for the most part, these movies are color shaded pretty much the same way. As a result, I'm just kinda desensitized by the look of these DC animated movies. The only reason why I don't completely resent it is that I appreciate the non-cartoony aesthetics that closely resembles the tone of these movies, and if I had to be honest, this is not even my biggest issue. What does bother me the most is that in every one of these movies, the facial and body expressions are not very good. The characters tend to look kind of deadpanned, and the in-betweening looks kind of cheap. And I mean, I kind of get why that's the case. I mean, I understand that these are straight to DVD movies and don't have the same budget as an animated feature, so as a result they need to save resources and labor time for the fight scenes, since that's the main thing you want to see in these movies. And honestly, I could excuse the low keyframes, but I do also think that this is an issue with the storyboarding. Now, I should probably state that this is only a problem with dialogue-centric scenes, since the fight scenes tend to look pleasantly enjoyable, and in this movie the fight scenes were pretty fun, brutal, and entertaining, so I'm only talking about scenes centered on dialogue. Now honestly, I'm not sure if it's right to entirely blame the storyboarders, since the animators might also be at fault for not translating the shots with the amount of emotion the storyboarders wanted, but I do think you can emulate a lot of emotion with just one frame, even if the tweening isn't that strong. I think a good example is a very small scene from an episode of Symbionic Titan, where a police officer was interrogating Lance. Now I'm only gonna refer to one very specific sequence where the officer asks who's the white dragon, and it's really just a sequence where the camera pans to the left and the officer's cell moves slightly faster to the right as he attempts to intimidate Lance. Now, as you can tell, not a lot of hard animation was likely needed aside from the lip syncing, but with this sequence alone you managed to invoke so much strong emotion. Just look at the anger and the over-the-top grittiness of the officer as he sweats like hell. Scenes like this are very rare in these DC animated movies, and it's not any different in this one as well. I challenge you to seek any shot in this movie that you would screen cap because it looks cool. You'll likely fail. I think the moment that turned me off the most was when they introduced Maxim Steel, and he had a more playboy, energetic, and cocky personality compared to the rest of the cast, even among the voice actors, but aside from the distinct outfit, he had the same lack of expressiveness that everyone has. And none of this is to say that I think the overall visual presentation is bad, because I don't. I mean, I question their decision to tone down the colors, but it's far from being incompetent. It just looks boring. Both the character animation and designs look boring, and it's the main reason I struggle to get into these movies. Yes, the action looks cool, although I do have some nitpicks. We don't see any electric waves when Zoom runs unless you look closely, which is not an accurate depiction of how the Speed Force powers every speedster. There are also some dumb decisions here and there made by the characters. When Zoom and his crew kidnap Killer Frost, Deadshot decided to shoot the back of the van, which, may I remind you, is where Killer Frost is lying, when he could have just shot the tires, which would have at least slowed down the vehicle. Also, around the end of the movie, when Bronze Tiger was fighting Zoom, Zoom decided to give 1,000 cuts until he would let go of the card and die, instead of just cutting the palm of the hand that's holding the card. It would take a while before he would pass out or bleed to death, and in that period, while it could have been short, you would have snatched the card. It's a lot better than wasting your energy, which is not the best option since you're dying. But whatever, this was a fun movie, miles better than 2016 Suicide Squad, though not really something I would revisit. It's a 6 out of 10 movie. Rating shows and movies is something I'm thinking about doing. Here's a list of the ones I've already rated. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye for now.